Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. This is the episode 3 of the series. I'm super happy to be recording this series. I think I had a lot of nice feedback, and I guess you guys are enjoying the series, so I want to record as quicker as possible, but I will keep the promise as one video per week. This week so far, this is the 3rd episode that I'm recording, so let's dive to it, right? So this is my GitHub. So if you don't follow me there yet, this is my GitHub, Sean Howers. So you will find all the code for this bootcamp inside this MERN course bootcamp. I left a few docs here explaining exactly what we're doing. They're both episodes that are recorded already. And the news is that we have in our Discord group. So if you're not part of the Discord group yet and you have interest of joining, feel free to join. Also, I'm splitting all the work in different folders so that you can track what we're doing and where we are with the development of this project. And feel free, if you find any issues, to comment or send any pull requests to amend that, right? So thanks very much, guys. I really appreciate your help and your support. So let's dive to the project, right? So the last time that I recorded, we create a few endpoints for the events, right? So we now have a get route for get an event ID, and we have a post route to create an event, right? So I want to create now a 3rd route, and this will be basically another get request, but instead to be event will be event. And the reason being is because we want to have an endpoint where it's going to make possible for us to fetch all the events that we have already, right? And this will help us to create the dashboard, to display all the events, and then lately we're going to add a little bit more fancy things here so that we can use filters perhaps. So it'll be quite nice. So let's dive to the controller. So if you control click in the get event by ID, we're going to get back to the event controllers, and here is where we create these both controllers, right? So right now what we need to do is basically kind of clone this function because it will be very similar to this one. So we'll copy and paste this entire thing. I will rename that using again the F2 button. So this will be get all events. Here we're gonna have a request and a response. We don't need the ID right now because we're going to use that to get all the requests. The event will be called now. You can also select, if you don't know this yet, you can select the word, and if you press Command D, you will select the next one, Command D, the next one, next one, just to show you. And the main difference, if you do F2 again, that will rename it just the property, right? So it won't grab the events here or these events here. So that's why I like to use that. So now you can see we have events, and events. This is a different word. And basically, instead of find event by ID, now we just want to do the find method. And here, Mongoose is super smart, MongoDB. So if you pass an empty object, will return all the events inside the module event. That basically is the event that we created before, right? So this is incredible. So let's copy this method. Let's save this file. Basically, let's change this. If something goes wrong, we will say we don't have any events yet, right? So we can handle that in the front end. Now if you come back to the routes, what we can do here is basically pass event controller dot get our events. And we have already the server running. So now basically what we can do, we can test that and see if that is working or not. So remember that I said that we would have that endpoint for test. So the reason is every time that you go to status, you know that the server is working fine and you don't have any errors on your code. Basically, I'm using a JSON viewer extension, so if you want to install, it's just Chrome extension. There's no secret in that. So let's change that now for event, and there you have it. Now we have events being returned of all the 3 objects that we created. So let's add this to Insomnia so that we can keep using Insomnia for that, because I really like, I think if you want to become a really nice backend developer, you need to master how to use these tools in your favor, because this is really the quickest way that you can do this stuff, right? So if you get the event by ID, we're going to just duplicate that. We will call this get all events. You can name as you prefer. Remember now that we don't need an ID, we just need all the events. If you send this request, there you have it, same result. So I'm super happy with that. Now the next thing that I want to do is to adjust some stuff inside the events. I was looking this before we start to record today, and I noticed that another good property that will help us along the way, it will be to have event type, right? And what I mean by that is you can have event being a run, or it could be a cycling, or it could be a swimming, or you could have like a triathlon event. So I think a event type will be quite descriptive, but I don't like to use the word type, because as you can see, type refers to type of that is string, if that's number, of this is like a date, right? Those are types, those are essentially types. So what I want to use instead will be sports. So I'm typing Portuguese, so sports. So this sport will be a string, and basically from now on, every time that we create a new event, we can pass the sport string. So let's say this is a run, and then we know this is a run. And why are we going to do that? This is basically because we want to create a way for us to filter by sport. Imagine that you are someone that likes to play sports, you like to join events, but you want to join just running events because you don't care about cycling events. So you probably want in the front end a way of filtering those events. And this is exactly what we're going to do right now, right? Okay, so now for us to finish that, the next thing that I want to do is basically create a mechanism so that we can query using the new type property that we did. So basically this is going to be another route that we also get the event like so, but instead to get just the event, do you remember the event ID? So yeah, exactly what we will do. So we're going to have now a param that basically will be event type, right? So then you can sports, we call that sports. Let me confirm that. Yeah, so that will be sports instead. Yeah, much better, right? So now we're going to get, it's no longer the all events. Let's see which one that we're gonna create. So we can get all events, and basically we can do the following thing. We can do the same thing that we had here, but we can have an option of getting the sport, and then what we can do is basically say if you have a sport, right? If you don't have any sport, you can return this. Let me think how we best can do that. So if you don't have, right, I see. So I'll try to keep as clean as possible without to make that hard to read. So now what we could do, in my opinion, we could basically do, if you have an event, I see, I think I have an idea that probably will work well for what we want. So we could do const query, this is equal iSport, or if sport is undefined, basically we can pass an empty object. And now what we can do here is say, if you have an sport, please find an sport, otherwise, yeah, let's do that. So basically I'm saying query is gonna be equal a sport, but if you don't have a sport object with a sport, so it's going to be an empty object, right? And then we pass query here, we check if we have an event, and we can carry on with the same thing that we have. So sport becomes an optional parameter. There is much cleaner, a better way to do, but I don't want to get that right now, to do like parameters that are default parameters. So I think in the last episode we're going to cover a new properties, and we're going to add some validation and other smarter things, so we'll let that for the later stage. So now what we can do to test is very simple. Basically, if you go to the website and we query that, we should get the same result. Indeed, we get the same result. However, now we do have an option to say disease will be running, right? And disease will be returning an empty object, because of course we don't have any running events yet. So why not create a new event? Let's try this together, right? So for now, the insomnia, let's create an event. Basically, disease will be this event is going to be called a 5K run, and we have a description, price, thumbnail, and we're going to add here iSport, and this will be a run. The sports will be running to match the query that we have there. We will be define exactly the types of the sports, but for now I'm just gonna create this one. I think I'm happy with that. Same photo, same everything. So this is returned. As you can see now, we have we forgot to implement that here. Okay, so bear with me. This is because inside the event we're not doing that. So here now we need to pass sport, and sports basically will be another property. So now if we create another event with that same name, convention, it's going to return one that has a sport running. Therefore, if I use running here, it returned that event. See? So that's why this is like a super easy, kind of works well for what we need. So I don't want to complicate that much. The photo is still working, everything is fine. So I think that's very descriptive. We understand what that is doing. And basically, now what we want to do is create an event that will basically be a delete request to allow us to delete event using the ID, right? So we're going to create here another method, and this will be the delete method. So be a sync delete. This will be rec and res, request and response. I remember, like, I did watch quite a lot of tutorials when I was learning to code, and people never described what rec and res was. I was like pre-med on that. I was like, what does that mean? Like, I don't know. But there you have it. So if you're hearing Frank, okay, Frank, we know you there. Like, my dog, he lives with me, so he's always around. Sorry about the noise. So let's carry on here. What matters? So basically, we're gonna have a try and catch function, and we're going to kind of copy this to say we don't have any event with the ID. So basically, if it fails, is the first scenario that we're covering, we're gonna return a message saying we didn't find that. If you look for status code, HTTP status code, so you're gonna find a list of all the status, and then you can have a look here. So we have bad requests, unauthorized, payment required, forbidden, not found. So not found will be, yeah, that sounds like a not found. So we can return here 404. This is not found, it doesn't exist. So basically we know that this is because the ID. So now what we want is basically the ID here, and what we're gonna do, we're gonna say const event, this is will be equal to event dot delete 1, and if you look at the definition, so this is will pick up one that has an ID and will delete, right? So that basically what that's going to do. So that's exactly what we want, and then here we're going to pass event ID. So basically if you find ones, it will first delete it. When delete, I was just thinking here, the 404 is more like when you do not find, the request doesn't find what you want. In this specific case, we will be good with 400. So I'll be coming back on my word. Let's keep it the 400, but you can check the list here. Yeah, I've just checked twice. This is a bad request. It cannot process because it has either like something wrong or I don't have the ID that I need, right? Okay, so let's have a look here. We have a method find by ID and delete. That is the right thing that we're looking for. So basically we're going to pass the ID here, it's going to find and it's going to delete, and if that works, what we want to return is a response that basically will say message deleted or something in this. So we can send a status. Okay, so when we want to delete, basically we can send the 204 back, and that means that the message was successful deleted. If you look back here, 204 is no content, the server successfully processed the request and is not returning any content. So this is just so that we know that it did work, the request. So basically, for us to be testing that, there's a few things that we can do. So if you look for this ID, so right, we can refresh this page. So we have one event running, but I want to delete other events because we just have one running, right? So let's go to the events where we have all the events, and here we're gonna find one, this one, right? This one didn't work for us. So this is my third event. Do you like running? And the final of the ID, well, I'm going to copy the ID so we can look for the ID, correct? So now basically what I'm going to do, that we finished to implement this delete method. Let's create a router for this, right? So basically we're going to create a normal router that gets an event by ID, that basically gets all the events, right? But instead of getting specific one event, we're going to change this request to delete, and we're going to pass this, and here we're going to pass the delete method, inside this object, right? So what we want to do here is basically say, now you have the option to get event passing an export. You have an option to get all the events. You have an option, let me put that down. you have an option to get an event using the ID. So this is will return a singular event, and that will be used by the creator of the event if he wants to see the event and open that specific thing. We're gonna use that, like, imagine that you have an event like a post on Facebook, and if you want to know more about that post, you're gonna click on top of that, so then we can fetch all that information if we need to edit or do anything. And here we have the post for the upload, the thumbnail, and here now will allow us to delete. So this is the signature of the routes that we have, right? So if I get this, so is event.delete. So that means if I pass the ID here, that won't work, right? That won't work because the browser, remember, the browser always do a get request. So that's why we're using Sonia, right? So then we have create event, get event by ID, get all events. Now we can create another query that basically will be another request, sorry, that will be delete. So that very drastic tells us what that does. So this is, we'll have, I think I misclicked it. Let's create that. So it'll be delete. This is will be delete. Let's create that. Yeah, now there we go. This is will be URL again. The event, and here the ID, right? So this is basically the ID that we're passing there. So let's say this is the third object. So now it's quite easy. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have 4. If I do this request, let me see. This is kind of didn't work, right? So let's see why that didn't work. Maybe I didn't save that. So the thing is, I'm not calling that, and I'm also not doing a wait. So there's 2 mistakes here. So basically, I will try to delete that. If the delete fails for any reason, we're gonna say, we didn't find that, right? So that's good enough for me. So let's go again, process this, no content. So that means that now we refresh here, and there you have it. We have 3 events only, and that one gone, right? So this is exactly what we needed. So I can say that we are pretty confident that now you have the options of get either, if you take the event and pass an ID, get just one event. Let me see that. That should work. Okay, roots, event ID. We have 2 methods, and that is wrong because this is get all event, and this is event get. So this is get event by ID. We forgot to rename that, I believe, because this is, we'll get an event by ID. Event ID does not exist. We return find by ID, right? So I think this was a copy and paste that I did earlier, and I forgot to rename. So that's bad, my bad, sorry. But now we know why it kind of didn't work. We need to update here. So the events by ID, if you do controller dot get event by ID, now that should work, right? So now we have a request here that will return just one event. Yeah, so that's, there you have it. Now we have a functional CRUD operation, so we can create event, we can get event by ID, we can even get all the events, or we can use filters that will be quite interesting to filter by the query, right? So in this case, running, it could be swimming, and this is won't return anything because this is doesn't exist for us, right? So I just come back here, and I was really thinking, there's a few things that I would like to do. First, I think the event controller is kind of doing a lot of things, maybe too much. So I'd like to split this controller a little bit. And the way I can see the controller to be more organized is that we're going to create a dashboard controller.js, and then from the event, we're going to leave the create event and the delete event, right? And I will explain you why. So these both methods that we have, get event by ID and get our event, they are event related, but if you think uh, about the they're event related, but if you really think about the separations of concerns and the abstractions that we do in programming, you're going to soon realize that these are fetching events that we're going to serve in the dashboards. But under the user page, if the user wants to create or delete an event, so that will be the event controller. So in this case, we are definitely using events, but we should be using a different controller to keep the logic concise. Controller shouldn't be doing that much of things. And then that is basically why I'm going to move that here. So remember that before we move, we need to do a model.export and export the object, and then we can paste that inside, remove that comma, and we can borrow this event from the top because we will need that, right? So that's how I like to do programming. I'm allowing myself to take decisions during the recording time when I can see that that fits, right? So this is a perfect case where I wanted to you guys to make sure that you understand. Sometimes we start with a problem, we solve the problem, and then we refactor and improve the code base. So what I don't want to do is what all the people do in those tutorials, that they type perfect code, well thought code from the beginning into the end, and they don't show you the main thing, on my opinion, that is the thought process, how the developer think about the problem, how to solve, how to split things. So this is my take on that, right? So let's come back to the code. So basically now we're going to have event. I'm going to split this again with the dashboard. And basically, when you create or delete an event, this is related to event. However, if you have a export filter, maybe event controller get our event and get event by ID, these both will be definitely related to this one. And I'll tell you what, I will rename that as well for dashboard. So let's keep that dashboard. So then if you change that to, let's import the new controller. So this will be dashboard controller. And with the dashboard controller, we're going to basically get our event. And let me think, the event controller.get event by ID, this is also have been moved here, right? Mm -hmm, mm -hmm. Okay, I will move that. I'm kind of thinking that we kind of made that redundant, but I will keep that as it is for now. I'll just update the controller so we can come back to this router later on, right? So let's not waste that much time here. So now that we have the dashboard events, we have the dashboard, we have the events, and we have the user. there's a few things that we still not complete. So I'll try to show you. So one of the things, I love this extension, by the way, is a to-do extension. So you can find in the store somewhere here, if you do to-do, there's a few of them that does that, right? So basically, we need to do a session controller. We need to do, apart from the session controller, just so that you can understand, it will be the controller responsible for the login, right? So basically, yeah, I'll call that login controller. And apart from the login controller, we will be able to subscribe to events. So subscribe, that means you want to be able to hire the event, right? Like you see a race and you want to participate of that event. So then we're going to have a subscribe controller, subscribe controller. We might change these names, but so that we can keep on top of the stuff that we need to do. When you subscribe, that means the user did a request to the control to the event, and the controller and the event owner will receive this request. So then the event owner, there's two ways for the event owners. It can either approve or reject the request. So we're going to have approval controller, and we're going to have the rejection controller. Does that make sense? I hope that does. So this is what we're going to start implementing now. But the first thing that I want to implement will be the login controller. So let's start from the login controller, right? So the login controller will be a quite interesting controller. So we're going to create this controller here. It will be a login controller. And this login controller, it will have a few things. First thing that we need to do is require our user controller from the modules, like so. Then another thing that we want to do, remember the Bcrypt, right? So Bcrypt. So Bcrypt. I don't know how to pronounce that. If you know how to pronounce that, please let me know. Require. So this is a Bcrypt. Bcrypt. Yeah. So let's import the Bcrypt. And then I will define module.export. This will be equals to an object, as it usually it is. So then inside this, we basically going to have just basically one method. I'll call this a store. Yeah, async store. This is will take a rec and a res, as we usually do. And then basically we're going to have a try and catch, right? Like we normally do. A few things that we need to think. We're going to have a request coming in that we're going to check for mainly initially for both email and password. So let's take the email and password straight away from the request.body. And what we can do with that is check if the email does match, right? With the email and password does match. So the first thing that we want to do is make sure that if we have a request that does not contain an email and a password, imagine you looking at a form where you log in and you need to fill your email and your password. If you don't fill one of these fields, we want straight away to throw an error, right? And send this information to the front end. So we want to see emails or I'm in the dark, so I'm typing everything wrong, sorry. Or password is missing, we will return a response, a status 200. However, because I don't want to fail this request because the user is in the front end, we don't want it to close the session, but we're going to send a JSON response that will have a message, and this message will basically saying field missing. I think required field missing. Required field missing. The way I'm going to work is every single time that we send back to the front end and a message, we're going to make this message appears in the front end. So that could be dynamically, and you don't need to be checking, oh, have the password fail, so then you fill password message. And another security advice that I will give, every time that you're looking for email or password, you don't want to you don't want to tell whoever is trying to log in if it's the password or if it is the email that is wrong. And the reason being is quite logical, is because if you do that and someone perhaps is trying to hack your user, they will know, oops, I got now the email right because the message is coming from password. So we don't want to do that. This is kind of following best advices for this type of things, right? User industry, so industry advice, I would say. So we're gonna say user await dot user dot find one, and we're going to pass an email, right? So what that's gonna do, that's gonna look on the request, do I have this email inside my database? Can I find a user that has an email that matches that? If that returns true, so we're going to say if user, so this is another check we're going to do. So if the user does not exist, basically we're going to kind of return an error again. So copy that, but we will change this user not found. And we can say, do you want to register instead? And basically, if we do have a user, well, that means the email is filled. Here's like a validation. Did you insert email? Did you insert password? Yes. Now, does the email match some user? No. So that's the difference between them. If user, here's the interesting part. So pay attention to this, right? So here, now that we have a user, we want to check if the password that I got, this password, matches the password that the user has inside the user object, inside this property, the user that we found in the database with this email. We want to check if the password does match with this password. But do remember that we are using Bcrypt so that we are hashing the password. So this is just for you, keep in mind. So basically what we're going to do here, we say if I have a user and await bcrypt dot await bcrypt dot compare. So bcrypt has a method that will check against the password of the request and the user dot password, that is the user object that has a password saved in the database. So if I have a user and the password match, that means the password that is coming in the request matches with the password that we have inside the user that is hashed, we're going to log in the user, right? If that doesn't return true, we're going to say email or password do not match. So the way we're going to do is basically very simple. We're going to say const user response, and then we're going to create an object that will be stored inside the cookies of the browser so that we know when the user are logged in or when it's not logged in. So that we're going to return a response that contains the ID and that also contains the user email. So that's how we can look for what the user, which user is logged in our server. So here we want to do an ID. This is the MongoDB ID. So be user.id. Basically, remember, I'm going to show you, make sure that you can follow what we're doing here. So let's open Insomnia. Let's get user again. That's enough for us. So this was the last user that we got. Now let me start the server. That helps. So if we fetch this user, so I know that the user object has ID, email, first name, last name, and password. That's what I was explaining before. Password is hashed, but the password that is hashed is the password inside the user saved in the database. This is the request that will be coming from the this will be like the post request. So this is not hashed. Bcrypt has a compare method that checks, if you look here, for any data against encrypted data. And then it returns either true or false, but because you can see the method signature here is a Boolean, but the thing that you need to pay attention is the promise, right? So it returns a promise. It is a promise that we will resolve in a Boolean. This is the type definition for those who understand a little bit of TypeScript. So this is basically what it is the function signature. So basically in this example, that's why we're using await in front of the bcrypt, because it returns something that needs to be resolved. So then we await until it resolves, process this information, and then we check this stuff, right? So basically what I want to return here is also an email property that will be user.email, right? So then we have enough information to save inside the browser. Another thing that we can do, we're probably going to implement in the future, but it's also return the type of the user. Because remember that I said we will have two types of user. That could be a partner, that will be like an event creator, or it could be just a customer, right? If you log it into Strava, you're just a customer. You're not creating races. You're not creating events. So that's what I mean. And once that we have that, basically now it's just return a rest.json. We need to convert this to JSON, and then we use a response. So there you have it. Will be enough for us to log in. However, if that fails, we want to return, I will copy this again. We will return user or email does not match. So we're never going to tell why, if that's the password or if that's the email that is wrong, right? So we're going to return that. So user or email or password don't match. Yeah, email or password. I don't know what I have today. Email or password does not match. Okay, so that's enough for me. Then there's another scenario where we can think of, we need to think about this. If we have an issue here, basically we're going to throw an error in this specific case And the error is always an object that gets a string. So then we will say error while we're going to say authenticating a user. And let's pass the error back here, right? So now we have this working. We need to create a router for that. So basically, in this specific case, I think we should create login, maybe a login router. Yeah. So let's do a login router. Like in this case here, we will have a routes dot post. We're going to post information. We're going to send information, right? So this will be a dash login, and basically this is we'll take our new controller. So we can come back here and say login controller, and this login controller will basically require a controllers folder, login controller. And what the login controller will do is basically return that. So the login controller.store. That's enough for us. This is will do what we need it to do. So basically, we can test this now, right? So imagine, let's look for that user again. So we don't know the password anymore, right? So that's the thing. I think the password is either password or test. So let's test that, right? So I'll create another folder here. You can double click with your right button, or you can click on that plus sign. So this will be called a login. And then inside the login, I'm going to create a store request. That basically is the method name. I always like to use that. Is a post, and this is a JSON response. So if you create that, why I'm saying that this is a JSON, because if you look the login controller, so that you can understand what I'm doing, we can see that we getting this stuff from the body, right? So const email password. So we need to send an email and the password. So in this case, we will have an email, and the value of this email will be the email that we have here. So it's test4 at test4.com, Jean at test4.com. So let's add this to the store. And the password, I have a feeling, I don't remember anymore, I swear, but I have a feeling that the password was password. So now we can use the URL. This will be a post request to login. All right, so if I send that, yay, I was right. So basically it did login because it found the mail, it decrypted the password that was hashed, and returned an ID and the email. So why I'm returning ID and email? So that the front end can do stuff with it. And why I'm saying that, because like maybe you want to show in the login like welcome Jean and their name. So we will add more info there. Let's do that. So let's add more information to the user response, right? So we know that has an email. If you look for, let's look at the module and see what the user has. So we don't want to return the password, but we want to return the first and last name. And we want to return the email, right? So we also could include into the user the type, right? So we discussed that before. We could have different type of users so that you can create races or subscribe to races. But I'll keep simple for now. We're gonna add that later on. I think that's better. So let's for now return the first name and the last name as well. so that we can present that in the front end. So if we come back to the login controller, we're going to add here first name, and the first name will be user dot first name. And we're going to do the same for the last name, user dot last name. So this is, we'll return what we need so that we can test it again. Basically, we send the login request, and there we go. Now we have the information that we need from the user. So now that's it, guys. I think we have a decent app in a decent state. If we have now the login controller, let's remove that from there. We want login. There you have it. We have login, dashboard, events, and user. And for the next video, we're going to do the subscribe controller, approval and rejection controller, and maybe do the setup for starting your first front end. So that's it, guys. I hope you are enjoying this series so far. I need your support. This is like being a lot of work for me. So I hope you can leave the like and leave behind like a nice comment to support the channel. This helps quite a lot with the YouTube algorithm, so the YouTube will know that the video has a nice quality and will send the video for more people, and that will help us to keep series and videos like this one going. So guys, thanks very much. I see you in the next video.